Say what you want about PlayStation Now when compared to Xbox Game Pass, and there is certainly a lot to say about that. But the PlayStation Now library has over 800 games, which is an extremely large amount, so I thought now is a good time to list what I believe are the top 20 PS Now games, which turned out to be rather difficult. Deciding which games made the cut was very tough, so make sure to stay till the end where I list a few honourable mentions that didn't quite crack the top 20, and deciding the ranking of the games that did make it was even more difficult. While I accounted for a game's global impact on a console generation or the gaming industry at large, I mostly accounted for a game's impact on me. So, this list is subjective. Don't go running to your mum when Dishonored 2 doesn't make the cut, not because I think that game's a little bit overrated, but because there's very little your mum can do in that situation, so it's better just not to waste her time, you know? Regular subscribers will have heard me say this many times before, but one more time, for anyone new, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 2 games are downloadable to your console on PS Now, but PS3 games are stream only. Now, that might make PS3 games less tempting or even irrelevant on PS Now, but I didn't want to let the streaming factor impact PS3 games ranking in the list too much. If you would like to see a downloadable only version of this list, i.e. the top 20 PS4 games on PS Now, please let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, if you could leave a like on the video if you like it, that would mean a whole lot to me. It really helps the channel out. Without further ado, these are the top 20 PS Now games. Let's do it. One of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, Shadow of the Colossus, comes in at number 20 on this list, which is setting the bar pretty high, I must say. While this PS2 classic story holds up immaculately, where you roam a barren land on the hunt to take down 16 colossi to bring back this girl's soul to the land of the living, the controls have not held up so well. Whether you get through one colossus or all 16, the controls never stop feeling rather sticky and stiff, which is a shame because the PS4 remaster of this game I apparently fixed a lot of these problems, but that version isn't on PS Now. It's far from a deal breaker though. There remains a very real sense of scale as you approach these hulking colossi that barely notice your existence, which strikes very conflicting feelings of awe and remorse as you defeat them. The latest game from Quantic Dream has you experience the singularity, where artificial intelligence has exceeded the intelligence of humans and machines look just like people. Detroit Become Human excels in its branching narrative, allowing the player to manipulate the story at key points without having to start the game over again. Not only is this a big time saver if you're the type of person that likes to do things differently on subsequent playthroughs, but it's embedded into the story in such a way that doesn't disconnect you from the game world. As for the story itself, Quantic Dream is known to spin a fine yarn only to let it spiral out of control. Become Human isn't without its faults, sometimes mirroring the android struggle a little too closely with actual historic slavery, but this is still the most cohesive story that the studio has put out to date. PS Now has some big omissions when it comes to 3D platformers, with games like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot just begging to be added to the service, but another platformer that has lived in the shadow of those games is Sly Cooper. The Sly Cooper collection has the same tongue-in-cheek humour, casual combat, and swathes of collectibles as its contemporaries, with an added helping of stealth. Sly Cooper is a master raccoon thief, which does sound weird, but it's no weirder than a bear and a bird on its back, is it? Or a bandicoot. That's not even a real animal, is it? Come on, Australia. If you're looking for a hit of nostalgia or to scratch that 3D platforming itch, Sly Cooper has you covered. Another game buried deep in the PS Now library, Soma traps you in an underwater dystopia where machines think they're people and most of them want to kill you. A psychological horror from the team behind Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Soma swaps out the jump scares for story as you seek out the last remaining inhabitants in a research station beneath the waves. Its setting and environmental storytelling owe a lot to BioShock. Those who want to explore will find out information relating to the events that led to the present. But Soma's ability to craft a sci-fi horror story that asks some philosophical and existential questions makes it stand out in its own right and make it well worth playing. God of War 3 picks up where the second left off, as Kratos has another bash at climbing Mount Olympus. The journey up a mountain also functions as a pretty standard diagram for a game's pacing. You start at the bottom, and as you work your way up, you may experience some twists and turns, but you will eventually reach the summit. But God of War 3's pacing is more like this. The first 20 minutes has you scale a cliff face that turns out to be the arm of a rock titan who helps you fight Poseidon, who is riding on water horses and stabs at you with giant crab legs made of rock. And then the rock titan throws you at him and you bash his head in and you gouge his eyes out and you snap his neck and you just yank him off a ledge. You would think, after such an intense fight, this would be the moment to relax, gather your bearings, find a moment's respite as you prepare yourself for the next. There is very little in God of War 3 that cannot be solved through violence, whether it's slashing with blades, smashing people's face in, prying open rib cages, or whatever ingenious thing Kratos comes up with next. It's a testament to Santa Monica Studios then, that despite God of 3 being extremely linear and predictable, it is never ever dull, somehow managing to maintain its extremely high intensity rate for the full 10-hour runtime. Doom 2016 brought the Doomslayer back in the best possible way, that rare reboot that manages to modernize the formula that made it such a success while bringing the genre forward yet again. But this fast-paced, over-the-top, maniacal campaign is such a breath of fresh air from the hundreds of military shooters that came before it. On the surface, Doom may look and sound like mindless fun, but its secret sauce is that it's actually a puzzle game dressed in FPS clothes, with ammo coming from chainsaw kills, health coming from glory kills, and demons requiring certain weapons to kill them. Doom executes this fascinating and addictive flow state when you can piece it all together. Naughty Dog has risen to elite developer status, and Uncharted is one of their finest works. An expedition to the legendary valley of Shambhala Among Thieves builds a cast of characters and a storyline on par with the very best Hollywood adventure films. The sequel better blends the puzzle solving, platforming and action set pieces together, avoiding the slight sense of routine that crept into the latter half of the first game. The combat still feels a little bit by the numbers though, and this wouldn't be a problem if Among Thieves didn't like to break out into large-scale gunfights so often. But it's when the game slows down, letting you wander through gorgeous scenery and see characters like Nathan, Chloe and Eleanor deepen and change, is when Naughty Dog is at its peerless best. While its beginnings can easily be traced back to the likes of Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones, Among Thieves was the first game Uncharted set its own course to significance. A bit of a sleeper hit in 2017, Horizon Zero Dawn has found the limelight in the years since, and for good reason. The path of the post-apocalyptic open world is well trodden, but Horizon had a unique setting that really made it stand out. Set in the 31st century, humanity has regressed to hunter-warrior tribes, replaced at the top of the food chain by these animalistic machines, which are undoubtedly the highlight of the game. They are challenging, intuitive, and awesome to look at, and are cleverly integrated into the standard RPG tropes like combat, travel, and vantage points. As an inferior warrior, Aloy must routinely rely on stealth to get around, and while these mechanics are no different to most other AAA games, it was still enough to break the immersion for me. I understand that stealth is about manipulating the AI, but when something like this happens, the AI just seem stupid. No amount of manipulation results in this. This is broken. I could try and explain Metal Gear Solid 5 in the context of the Metal Gear Solid universe, but I don't think any of us want that, really. You know, you haven't got all day, I've got 11 more games to get through, so I'll frame it as this. It's set before the events of the first Metal Gear Solid, and you play as Venom Snake, who's the one with one eye and a prosthetic arm that can shoot lightning. You're all caught up. The Phantom Pain's key departure from the series is its open world setting, which allows for huge variety in the missions. There are 100 different ways to infiltrate a base and take out enemies, but the core mechanics are still fundamentally Metal Gear. Concrete stealth, which makes Zero Dawn look like you're that parent that got stuck to play hide and seek with a bunch of toddlers. and the toddlers all have blindfolds on, they can't even see. Batman knew something was up when he captured the Joker and brought him into the madhouse. Now, I knew the master plan all along. Let the inmates take over the asylum from the inside. Because, you know, I'd seen the game previews. But no one could have predicted how big Arkham Asylum would turn out to be. Few games on this list have such genre-defining mechanics as Arkham Asylum. The timing-based combat and stealth sections can be found in countless games since, but their roots are here, supplying the nutrients to a solid base, with a handful of iconic villains that support the story, but hundreds more scattered through and found in Easter eggs, collectibles, riddles, and combat challenges. Is that analogy doing it for you? I may be barking up the wrong tree with that one. The final boss may dilute what the game does so well to build up to, but there's a reason. The entirety of games media said that this is the game that really makes you feel like Batman. As cliche as this line has become, this is what Batman games looked like before Arkham Asylum, and that don't feel like the Batman.
This is fucked beyond belief!
Into the top 10 we go with HD remasters of Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and the original Metal Gear Solid 1, which was originally released on the MSX2. I know, it's just a keyboard, the 1980s was wild, but that's also playable within Metal Gear Solid 3. Even more so than the Phantom Pain, it is futile to try and explain what's going on here, yet these games defined cinema in video games. And note that I said cinema and not story, because there's a difference. So much of cinema is spectacle, moments that make you go, well, that's cool. So what if the story is convoluted to the point of confusion for only the most die-hard of fans? I want to just see Snake be a badass. So what if this guy has bees coming out of his arms? Like, I want to see him fire the bees out of his arms. It's bees, man. I will say you need a certain mindset to play these games today, and that's because there's a level of precision that goes into everything you do, from just movement and stealth, but also things like hitboxes and managing your inventory. Even the start screen has a little too much radio chatter every time you need to save the game. Like, that gets old kind of quick. You need a great deal of patience, but arguably that's what a stealth game should be about. And honestly, these games are like pieces of video game history at this point. Like, you should be taught this shit in school, because none of this happens and looks as good as it does without this. Rockstar is king of the open world, effortlessly blending fun things to do with story missions, even if the variety of those story missions has been criticized. Replacing the condensed streets of Liberty City with the Wild West, Red Dead Redemption places you at the violent end of the cowboy era, where John Marston must bury his past and find his place in this strange new future. Let's put the number of trailing missions to the side for now. The overarching narrative of Red Dead Redemption is stellar, developing at whatever pace you see fit while building to this pulsating finale, and one of the best things for me is how the game continues after that conclusion, rather than booting you back to your most recent save like so many other games do. I mean, this is Grand Theft Auto with cowboys. Do I really need to say any more than that? Hollow Knight rests on the fringes of the underrated, retaining its hidden indie gem status despite being absolutely loved by anyone I know who's played it. The ruined underground kingdom of Hallownest is a lot like an iceberg, introducing you to very tight combat and platforming at the top, and then hiding this mass of mystery underneath. Hidden treasures, boss fights, friends, foes, all of which slightly unveil a little bit more of Hollow Knight's intriguing story, but only if you go out and find it, giving an incredible sense of agency to the player. The best parts of Hollow Knight are hidden in the nooks and crannies, and the Void Heart edition, which includes all of the DLC, will run you way over 50 hours if you want to sample it all, and that substance makes it one of the best Metroidvanias ever, and definitely the best Metroidvania on PlayStation Now. I have poured many hours into that game, when is Silksong coming out? It's rare for a studio to take a property as popular as Batman and create something that feels exciting and new, but it's even rarer for that studio to create a sequel that is bigger and better in practically every single way and maintain a narrative that is as good, if not better, than the original. In Arkham City, the walls of the asylum break down and the entirety of Gotham falls under the control of supervillains. Town districts are ruled by the gangs of Joker, the Penguin and Two-Face, which gives little corners of Gotham its own unique style, and a map that was 5 times the size of the original leaves even more space for villain appearances, collectibles and more nods to the comic books than a Harley Quinn bobblehead. Whether you're willing to grind out for every Riddler trophy, willing to complete every combat and Predator mission as Batman, Catwoman, Robin and Nightwing, or you're just here for the story, Batman Arkham City is the definitive Batman experience for me. Just really makes you feel like Green Lantern. I've mentioned already how Batman and Horizon Zero Dawn defied expectations to create something new, but since the 2000s, there is perhaps no more saturated a genre than the zombie apocalypse. 2013's The Last of Us began PlayStation's reign as the go-to publisher for narrative-driven games, and The Last of Us may be the best one of the lot. Combat is meatier and hard-hitting as you scrounge around for improvised weapons rather than pulling yet another ammo clip from Nathan Drake's cargo pants. But key to The Last of Us' success, as we're all aware of at this point, is Joel and Ellie and their relationship. They are introduced as quite routine characters, at least in keeping with the tropes and themes of the genre, but as they ride these waves of emotion along with the player, these gripping action sequences and stealth scenes juxtaposed against the quieter roams through the ruins and the countryside, they develop into such well-rounded characters with key yet conflicting motives, which is the perfect setup to that dramatic finale that everyone knows, but I still won't spoil just in case there's one of you out there that hasn't played it yet. When the story is this good, I'm not taking any chances. The only thing holding this game back on PS Now at least is that it's not the remastered version, which is more frustrating when the PS4 remastered version is on the PS Plus collection. But for PS Now players, it is PS3, the original version, and therefore streaming only. Ever since games like Metal Gear Solid introduced cinematic cutscenes, the path has been paved to interactive cinema, and I believe Until Dawn is the best example of an interactive story game to date, probably up there with some of the Telltale games. And it's actually turned to a genre that's typically light on story to do that. A direct your own teen slasher flick, Until Dawn expertly guides you through a remote getaway in the woods that, to the surprise of absolutely no one, goes horribly wrong. The characters do a lot of the heavy lifting, backed with excellent voice acting from real actors that were an actual fit for the role rather than just signed on because they were a recognizable face. But where Until Dawn shines most is in its moments of meta-narrative, as each talk with the analyst adds more weight to your decisions without them ever being shoved down your throat. In its purest form, a game is a challenge. You may prefer a game that tells an exciting story, or looks really pretty, or is fun to play with your friends, but if we go back to the core of gaming, it's about taking on a challenge and winning. Bloodborne is one of the ultimate video game challenges. A challenge that is far too difficult for me, I'll happily admit it. Buried within the game's tight controls, unforgiving enemies, item management, and haunting atmosphere is something seemingly counterintuitive. It is designed to make you lose, the same way classic arcade machines were programmed to drain every coin from your pockets. Bloodborne doesn't give a f*** if you tried your best. There are no participation medals here. You get as far as you can before dying, and then you die and you go back. Then you get a little bit further, but you die, so you go even further back. And then you get a little bit less than the first time because you think there might be a way to kind of run past the enemies, but then they catch up with you and you're fighting even more of these f***ers at once. So you die again, you try again, and maybe, just maybe, after an eternity of incremental wins against a barrage of losses, you pull through. But I wouldn't know about that last part. From Software has said on record that they value their core audience's appreciation for the game too much to make it more accessible to a wider audience that don't want to repeat the same section of a game 50 times over, and I respect them for that. I don't know the psychology behind making a game's prize trait the fact that it's just an absolute but Bloodborne has mastered it. There is so little to say about BioShock at this point, but no matter how well documented its success, I still have this connection to it that I can't fully verbalize. Released just 8 months into the PS3, Xbox 360 era, BioShock immediately set the benchmark for environmental storytelling in games and remains one of the best examples to date. From the descent into Rapture to uncovering Sushong's lab to Andrew Ryan and a golf club, BioShock is filled with iconic moments and characters, the majority of which you see just once, if at all, because Rapture's story has passed. You are merely scratching at the remains, searching through the broken shards of bathysphere glass to understand why it all went wrong. And the cherry on top is that while this remastered version was widely criticised for adding basically nothing over the original, it does make BioShock Remastered a PS4 game that you can download to your console. And it's worth noting that BioShock 2 Remastered and BioShock Infinite are also available on PS Now, and I think it's about time you dived back into Rapture's depths. I think XCOM 2 is magic. Bear with me. This game rivals the most thrilling moments of any game with a script, and it does so as a turn-based strategy game which has procedurally generated player characters and environments. You can make your soldiers your own through customization, but you'll eventually realize that they are all mere pawns in this very violent game of chess, and as we all know, very few pawns make it through to the end. But I can't help but have this very deep connection to any trooper that manages to climb up the ranks, because I know every mission I send them on could be their last. Basically every XCOM 2 mission has me flying by the seat of my pants as it barrels towards this crazy conclusion that I couldn't have anticipated. Whether it's a hidden pod of enemies that come out of concealment as I'm reaching the extraction point, or I just take a risk on an enemy Overwatch shot and hope for the best because I need to get to the end with one turn to spare. The unrelenting nature of the enemies in this game, which are constantly trying to flank, outmaneuver, stun, murder, obviously, mind control and knock you out, mean that a single lapse in concentration can wipe out your entire squad. Like Bloodborne, XCOM 2's difficulty is likely to alienate a lot of players. I think my first campaign I restarted at least 5 times, and that was on the beginner difficulty. I'm not even joking. But the grind is so worth it. There is an incredible amount of detail put into XCOM 2's strategic and tactical layers that continues to amaze me. Before I reveal my top pick, and in true Watch Mojo fashion, here are a list of some of the best games that didn't quite make the top 20. I'm just going to get out the way for this one actually. There isn't a single line of dialogue in Journey, and in some stroke of irony, I struggle to find the words to explain how this game makes me feel, but I'll give it a go. I find a comforting sense of familiarity wandering through Journey's ruins, and I think a lot of that comes down to runtime. It's about the same length as A New Hope, and the same way I can recite that film nearly scene by scene, I know which level of Journey is coming up at which time. In both cases though, I never feel like I've seen it all, either due to the richness of the characters and the world, or the ambiguity of its setting and themes, and in both cases it keeps me coming back for more. You might say that's subjective and merely personal preference, but I do think repetition plays into the cyclical nature of Journey. It's a very isolated pilgrimage to the top of the mountain, wandering through rolling sand dunes and finding fragments of a lost civilization. Somewhere along the way though, you'll realise there are others like you, each on their own journey, and how you interact with them is where the game delivers a co-op experience like no other. Your paths may cross, perhaps entwine, but never fully connect. You're never required to cater your own experience to meet someone else's, which is the case in basically every other game, right? Co-op requires cooperation, working as a team to outsmart the computer or another human-controlled team. Journey is more of a companionship than a cooperative. You simply exist in the same plane as the other player. They cannot be used as a tool to help you. They cannot become an obstacle. You do not need them the same way that they do not need you. You forge a relationship as equals. But I want to help them in Journey, more so than I ever want to help a random teammate on an FPS or an RPG. I find this weird sense of accomplishment, and it's almost like a pride in seeing this other companion reach their journey's end alongside me. In the final ascent, it feels very much like this is your journey to finish, yet for some reason I stopped mere inches away from the summit of the mountain just in case my companion would come to join me, not knowing if they would do the same, not needing them to do the same, and not knowing what lay on the other side for either of us, but waiting just in case.